Not her, the billionaire said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the quiet clink of glasses. The restaurant didn't stop, but it shifted just slightly, like air before a storm. Daniel Hayes didn't look up from his watch, a polished Swiss piece that caught the warm light and threw it back in cold reflections. I don't get served by waitresses like that. The words landed without volume, but everyone within 10 feet heard them. Emily Carter did too. She stood still for exactly 1 second. Not frozen, not shaken, just still. Then she stepped forward anyway. Her tray was balanced, her posture straight, her expression calm, in a way that didn't ask permission. "Good evening, sir," she said softly, setting down a glass of water with practiced precision. No tremor, no hesitation, just the quiet rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times and meant to do it one more. Daniel exhaled through his nose, irritation flickering across his face like a passing shadow. He finally looked at her, not fully, just enough to register the uniform. The simple ponytail, the absence of anything that demanded his attention. Background, replaceable. "I said I don't want her," he repeated, louder this time, glancing toward the manager as if correcting a minor inconvenience. Around them, conversations dimmed. Forks slowed. A couple at the next table exchanged a look, then quickly looked away. No one intervened. They never did. Emily didn't argue. She didn't apologize either. She simply nodded once, a small, almost invisible movement, then stepped back. The glass of water remained exactly where she had placed it, perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. Daniel watched her retreat for half a second longer than necessary. Something about the way she moved didn't match the role he had already assigned her. Too measured, too deliberate. He dismissed the thought. "Get someone else," he said, already reaching for his phone. The manager hurried over, voice tight with forced politeness. "Of course, Mr. Hayes. We'll take care of that right away." Emily had already turned to another table, a family of 3. The child dropped a napkin, and she bent to pick it up before it touched the floor, offering it back with a small smile that didn't feel rehearsed. The contrast was subtle, but it lingered. Service without performance. Kindness without calculation. Daniel didn't notice, or rather he chose not to. Minutes passed. The restaurant resumed its rhythm. Glasses clinked. Low laughter returned. The moment dissolved for everyone, except the ones who had heard it. And then it happened. From across the room, near the service station, a voice called out, clear and casual, "Emily Carter, table 7 needs you." The name traveled differently. It didn't land. It echoed. Daniel's hand paused mid-air, fingers hovering above his phone. Just for a second. Then another. The sound of it Carter slipped past the noise, past the music, past the controlled layers of his world, and landed somewhere deeper, somewhere older. He didn't turn right away. He didn't have to. The name had already reached him. And for the first time that evening, Daniel Hayes wasn't the one in control of what came next. Daniel did not move right away, but the world around him seemed to slow, as if the name had shifted something invisible in the air. And for the first time that evening, he actually looked not at the uniform, not at the role, but at the person who carried that name, Emily Carter. She was across the room now, speaking to another table, her voice low, her posture steady, her hands moving with quiet precision like someone who had learned long ago that attention was not something to chase, but something to control. He leaned back slightly, the leather chair creaking beneath him, a small sound, but it felt louder than it should have. His fingers curled loosely around the edge of the table, the glass of water still untouched, exactly where she had placed it. He noticed that now the alignment, the intention, the absence of carelessness, nothing about it was accidental, and that unsettled him more than her silence had. "Sir, your server will be right with you," the manager's voice returned, carefully polished, but Daniel barely heard it. His eyes stayed fixed across the room. Carter, he repeated it once in his mind, testing it against memory like a key, against a lock that had not been opened in years. The name did not belong in a place like this. Not in a uniform like that, not attached to someone who moved like she had nothing to prove. He had spent years building a life where names meant leverage, meant history, meant risk, and this one carried weight. Whether he wanted it to or not, a faint reflection flickered across his watch face. As he shifted his wrist, the light catching the metal, then fading just as quickly. Time moved forward, it always did, but for a brief second, it felt like something had circled back. Emily, someone else called again closer. This time, and she turned her head slightly, acknowledging without urgency, without hesitation. She did not rush. She did not adjust her pace. She simply finished what she was doing and then moved with the same calm rhythm toward the service station. And that was when Daniel noticed it. The smallest detail, the one thing that did not belong in a place like this. She was not avoiding his table. She was ignoring it. There was a difference. Avoidance carried tension. It revealed awareness. But this was something else. This was choice. And choice meant control. His jaw tightened just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to see, but enough for him to feel it. Mr. Hayes, would you like to order a different server now? Younger, uncertain, standing at the edge of the table, waiting for direction. Daniel did not answer immediately. He glanced down at the menu, but the words blurred together, meaningless in that moment. His attention was somewhere else, entirely drawn back. Again and again, to the same quiet figure moving through the room, like she had already decided how this night would go, and it would not depend on him. "Give me a minute," he said finally, his voice lower, now less sharp, less certain than before. The server nodded quickly, stepping back, relieved to retreat. And Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze lifting once more, just in time to see Emily Carter reach for a fresh tray. Her hands steady, her expression unchanged, like nothing had happened, like he had not spoken at all. And that was when it settled in, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet realization that pressed heavier than any confrontation would have. He had dismissed her in seconds. But whatever story stood behind that name had taken years to build, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel Hayes felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not control, but curiosity. The kind that did not ask permission, the kind that stayed. The minutes stretched in a way that felt unfamiliar to Daniel, not slow but weighted. Like each second carried something he had not accounted for before. The room continued its quiet rhythm, glasses clinking, soft conversations rising and falling, but his focus stayed locked on a single detail that refused to fade: the name Carter. It did not belong here, not like this, not reduced to a line on a schedule or a call across a dining room. He had heard that name in very different rooms, rooms with polished glass walls and numbers that could shift entire markets, rooms where one decision could build or break something permanent. And he remembered the first time it had mattered. The file had crossed his desk late one night years ago, buried under a stack of urgent deals. One more company on the edge. One more risk that did not fit his model. Except it had not been just another company. The Carter Group had been different, smaller, quieter, but precise. Their projections had not been loud, but they had been right. And in a world that thrived on noise, accuracy had been rare. He had studied it longer than he should have. His assistant had even noticed. "It is not a major player," she had said, and he had almost agreed, almost closed the file and moved on. But something had held him there. Something about the clarity, the restraint, the absence of exaggeration. It had felt deliberate, and for a brief moment he had considered investing not out of necessity but out of respect. And then the meeting had happened. He could still see the room. Clean lines, minimal distractions, the kind of space where every word carried weight. The man across from him had not tried to impress him, had not rushed, had not filled silence with promises. He had simply explained. The numbers steady, calm, as if he did not need approval to believe in what he had built. "We are not asking you to take a risk," he had said. "We are asking you to recognize." One Daniel had leaned back then, the same way he had just minutes ago in the restaurant, studying him, measuring him, deciding, and in the end, he had walked away, not because the deal was wrong, but because it was not his. He had chosen scale over precision, speed over patience. It had been the smarter move at the time. At least, that was how he had justified it. The Carter Group had disappeared after that. No headlines, no collapse, just gone, like a name erased quietly from the system. And he had not thought about it again until now, until a voice across a restaurant floor had carried it back to him without warning. "Sir, are you ready?" The server returned again, hesitant but trying to remain professional. Daniel blinked once, the memory dissolving as quickly as it had. Surfaced but not disappearing completely, it lingered beneath the surface, steady, present. "I will have the steak medium rare," he said. Automatically, his tone controlled again but softer than before. "And black coffee." The server nodded, writing quickly, then stepping away, and Daniel exhaled slowly, his eyes lifting, once more drawn back to the same point across the room. Emily Carter was adjusting a place setting, now aligning a fork with the same precision she had used at his table earlier. No wasted motion, no distraction, just quiet intention. And that was when the question finally formed, not loud, not demanding, just clear enough that it could not be ignored. What was she doing here? Not why had he refused her, not why had she ignored him, but something deeper, something that did not fit into the simple structure of the evening. If the name meant what he thought it did, if the memory he had just pulled from years ago was not coincidence, then this was not chance, this was something else. Something he had not planned for, and for the first time since he had walked into the restaurant, Daniel Hayes felt the balance shift slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for him to feel it in the way his attention refused to move on, in the way the room seemed smaller than before, and in the quiet understanding that whatever came next would not follow the rules he was used to setting. The coffee arrived first, dark and still, the surface unbroken, as the server placed it gently in front of Daniel, but he did not touch it right away. The steam rose, slowly fading into the warm light above the table, like something temporary, something that would not wait for him to decide, and yet he stayed still, watching it longer than necessary, as if the answer to a question he had not asked might appear there. The room continued its quiet rhythm, but now there was a distance to it, like he was no longer part of it, but observing from somewhere slightly removed. His fingers tapped once against the table, then stopped. The habit felt out of place here, too sharp, too controlled, for a moment that was beginning to resist control. Across the room, Emily moved again, not toward him, but past him, her steps, even her focus elsewhere. And that absence of attention carried more weight than anything she could have said. It was not defiance, it was not avoidance, it was simply a refusal to engage, and that unsettled him more than rejection ever could, because rejection acknowledged power, it responded to it, but this ignored it entirely. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes following her, without meaning to. Noticing details he had dismissed before, the way she adjusted a chair without looking, the way she listened fully when someone spoke to her, the way she did not rush, even when the room demanded it. There was no performance in it, no attempt to impress, just a quiet consistency that did not depend on who was watching. And for someone like Daniel, who had built his entire world on observation and reaction, it felt almost unfamiliar. "Is everything all right with your meal, sir?" The manager's voice returned again. softer now, more cautious, as if aware that something had shifted, but unsure how to address it. Daniel glanced down at the plate that had just been placed in front of him, the steak perfectly prepared, exactly as ordered, but it felt secondary now, like an obligation rather than a focus. "It is fine," he said simply, his voice measured but no longer sharp. The manager nodded, relieved, stepping back into the flow of the room, and Daniel picked up his fork but paused before taking a bite, his attention pulling back once more to the same point across the space. Emily had stopped near the service, stationed her back to the room for a moment as she wrote something down, her posture unchanged, steady, unaffected. And then another voice called out closer, this time not loud, but clear enough to carry Emily Carter. "Can you check table 7? Again, the repetition landed differently now, not as a coincidence, but as confirmation. And Daniel set his fork down without thinking, the small sound it made against the plate sharper than intended. A few heads turned briefly, then returned to their conversations, but he did not notice his focus had narrowed. Entirely, his gaze fixed as she turned slightly, acknowledging the call with a quiet nod, and began moving in his direction, not directly toward him, but near enough that the distance between them began to close. And with each step, something tightened in his chest, not pressure, not discomfort, but recognition, the kind that does not ask permission before it settles in front of you and waits. Emily reached the table beside his, speaking softly to the couple, seated there, adjusting something on the table with the same precision as before, and for a moment she was within arm's reach, close enough that he could hear her voice clearly for the first time, not just the words, but the tone, calm, even steady, in a way that did not change based on who she was speaking to. And Daniel turned his head slightly, his movement controlled but deliberate. "Emily," he said her name, without title, without formality, just the word itself, and it felt heavier than expected. Not loud, not commanding, just present. And for the first time that evening, she paused. Not long, not enough to draw attention, but enough to register. She turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his, not with surprise, not with hesitation, but with recognition that did not need explanation. And in that brief, still moment between them, the balance shifted again, quieter this time, but undeniable. She did not step closer, but she did not step away either. The distance between them held steady like an invisible line. Neither of them rushed to cross her eyes, rested on him calmly, not challenging, not welcoming, simply present, and Daniel felt it. Again, that quiet shift, the one he could not control. "You said my name," she replied, her voice low enough to stay between them, yet clear enough that it carried meaning beyond the words. He nodded once slower this time, as if acknowledging something he had not yet fully understood. "Carter," he said again, more carefully now. "That name is not common in my world." Without a reason, a faint pause followed. Not awkward, not tense, just measured, like she was deciding how much of the truth he deserved. In this moment, the room moved around them unnoticed. Plates being carried, conversations, continuing the soft hum of normal life. But for Daniel, it had narrowed to this single exchange. "It used to be in your world," she answered simply, her tone unchanged, but the weight of the words settled deeper than expected. He studied her more closely. Now not the uniform, not the role, but the steadiness behind it, the kind that does not come from training but from experience. "The Carter Group," he said, the memory forming more clearly as he spoke. "Financial projections, precise risk-controlled. You presented numbers that did not need to be explained twice." Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted. Not surprise, not pride, just confirmation. "My father presented those numbers," she said. "I was there." The statement was quiet, almost understated, but it landed with clarity. Daniel leaned back slightly, the chair moving a fraction of an inch as the past aligned itself with the present. "You were younger," he said, more to himself than to her. "You did not speak much. I did not need to," she replied. And there it was, not sharp, not defensive, just true, and for a moment he had no response, not because he lacked words, but because the ones he was used to using no longer fit the situation. You walked away from that deal. She continued, her voice steady as before. Not because it was wrong, but because it was not large enough for your portfolio. Daniel exhaled slowly, the accuracy of it, leaving no room for reinterpretation. That is how I make decisions, he said, but the explanation felt thinner than it had years ago. She tilted her head just slightly, not in judgment, not in disagreement, just in acknowledgement. That is how you did. She corrected, and the difference was small but undeniable. Silence followed, again, not uncomfortable but full, like something unfinished was waiting beneath it. Daniel glanced down briefly at the untouched coffee, then back at her. What happened after that? He asked the question, coming out quieter than intended. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted the edge of the neighboring table, a small habitual motion, then looked back at him. Nothing dramatic, she said, no headlines, no collapse, just a series of smaller decisions that did not go our way. She paused, then added, and one large one that did not. Daniel held her gaze this time, not trying to assert control, not trying to redirect the conversation, just listening, something he realized he had not done properly in a long time. We rebuilt what we could, she continued. We lost what we could. Not, her tone did not carry bitterness. It did not need to. The simplicity of it was enough. And now you are here, he said, the words quieter, now more observation than question. She nodded once, and now I am here. There was no apology in it, no explanation, just fact. And for the first time since the conversation began, Daniel felt the weight of something he had not accounted for. Not a mistake, not exactly, not something that could be corrected with a decision or a number, but something that remained regardless of what he chose next, the kind of thing that stayed in place. Long after the moment that created it had passed, he looked at her again, not as a server, not as a role, but as a continuation of a choice he had made years ago, and the realization settled in quietly but completely. This was not about being served. This was about being remembered. Daniel did not look away this time, and that alone changed the space between them. The distance was the same, but the meaning was not. He had spent years mastering how to end conversations before they began, how to reduce moments to decisions, and decisions to outcomes, but this did not follow that pattern. This lingered. I remember the numbers, he said quietly, his voice no longer carrying the sharp edge from earlier. I remember thinking they were too careful. Emily gave a small nod, not in agreement, but in recognition. Careful is another word for accurate, when you do not have room to be wrong. She replied, and the simplicity of it pressed deeper than any argument could have. Daniel let out a slow breath, his fingers brushing lightly against the side of the coffee cup, but still not lifting it. You believed in it, he said, more certain now. Your father believed in it. We did not need belief, she said. We had proof. The words were calm, but they carried something steadier than confidence, something that did not depend on whether he accepted it or not. And for a moment, Daniel felt something unfamiliar, not pressure, not resistance, but the absence of influence. There was nothing to negotiate here, nothing to redirect, no leverage to apply. If I had stayed in that deal, he started, then stopped the sentence incomplete because for the first time, the outcome was not clear, even to him. Emily watched him, not with expectation, not waiting for an apology, not pushing him to finish the thought, just present in the moment as it was. But you did not, she said gently, not correcting, not accusing, just closing the space where speculation would have gone. He nodded once, a small movement, but heavier than before. No, I did not. Silence followed again, but this time it settled differently, not as tension, but as acceptance. The kind that does not ask for resolution. People think decisions like that define everything. She continued, her gaze steady. They do not, they just reveal what you value at the time. Daniel looked at her closely, now the words landing with aponsis, clarity. He could not ignore. And what did I value, he asked, the question, quieter, than any he had asked. That night she did not hesitate. Scale, speed, control, she said. Things that grow fast and leave little room for uncertainty. She paused briefly, then added, things that do not always leave room for people like us. There was no bitterness in her tone. No accusation, just a statement that stood on its own. And Daniel felt it settle not as a challenge, but as a mirror reflecting something he had not examined in years. You built something successful, she said after a moment. No one can take that from you. He gave a faint nod, but it felt incomplete, like a sentence without an ending. And you built something that lasted, he replied. The words, quieter, now more measured. Emily's expression softened just slightly, not with pride, not with satisfaction, but with something closer to understanding. We built something that mattered to us, she said. That is different. The distinction was small, but it shifted the weight of everything that had come before. Daniel glanced again at the untouched coffee, the steam now gone, the surface still and cool, and for the first time he reached for it, lifting the cup slowly, as if acknowledging the passage of time he had ignored earlier. He took a small sip, then set it back down. Carefully, the motion deliberate. I was wrong to dismiss you earlier, he said the words, direct but without force, without the expectation that they would change anything. Emily listened without interruption. Her posture unchanged, her gaze steady. That was your choice, she replied, just like the one before. He nodded again, this time more certain. Not defensive, not explaining, just accepting. Yes, he said, simply and for a moment. Neither of them spoke. The room moved around them as it always had, but something between them had shifted into a quieter space, one where control no longer defined the exchange. And as Daniel looked at her again, he realized something that settled deeper than anything else that night. She had not come here to prove anything. She had not needed to. She had simply remained exactly who she was. And that had been enough to change the way he saw everything. The moment did not break, but it shifted again, quieter, deeper, as if something unspoken had finally settled into place, and neither of them needed to force it forward. Daniel rested his hand lightly against the edge of the table, no longer tapping, no longer directing, just present in a way that would have felt unfamiliar hours ago. What happened to your father? He asked the question. Careful, not intrusive, just enough to acknowledge what had been left unsaid. Emily's gaze did not move away, but there was a slight pause, not hesitation. Just a measure of how much truth belonged here. He stepped away, she said, not all at once. Not in a way anyone would notice at first, but slowly Daniel listened without interruption, the way he had learned to in rooms where every word mattered. But this was different. There was no strategy here, no outcome to secure, just a story being told without expectation. When the company started to shrink, so did everything around it. She continued opportunities, options. People who used to return calls stopped calling back. Her tone remained even, but the weight of it did not need emphasis. He did not lose everything in a single moment. He lost it in pieces, and each one was small enough to explain away until there was nothing left to explain. Daniel exhaled quietly, the image forming too clearly, the kind of decline that did not make headlines because it did not happen all at once. And you, he asked softly. Emily gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, not of amusement, but of recognition. I stayed longer than I should have, she said, trying to fix something that was already decided by choices made before I had any say in them. She paused, then added, eventually I realized that holding on was not the same as rebuilding. The distinction settled between them, steady and undeniable. Daniel looked down briefly, then back at her. You could have come back into that world, he said. With your understanding, your discipline, you would have found a place. Emily shook her head slightly, not dismissive, just certain. That world did not need me the way I needed to understand it, she replied. And by the time I did understand it, I no longer wanted the same things from it. Her voice softened just enough to carry something deeper. Not everything that is lost needs to be reclaimed. The words lingered longer than expected, and Daniel felt them settle into a place he had not examined before. So, you chose this, he said, not as a judgment, not as a question, just as an observation. Emily nodded once. I chose something that I could control in a different way, she said. Not through outcomes, not through numbers, but through consistency, through presence, through doing something well even when no one is. Watching Daniel glanced around the restaurant, the quiet, movement, the small details he had ignored earlier, now sharper, clearer. People underestimate that, he said almost to himself. Emily's expression did not change, but there was a quiet agreement in it. That is why it works, she replied, and for a moment, neither of them spoke again. The conversation had moved past explanation, past justification, into something steadier, something that did not need to prove its value. Daniel leaned back slightly, his posture no longer guarded, no longer calculating, just reflective. If I had made a different choice, back then, he began, but this time he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Emily understood the thought without hearing the end of it. You would still be who you are now, she said gently, just with a different story behind it. Daniel gave a small nod, the truth of it, settling without resistance. And you, he asked quietly, would you have stayed? Emily looked at to him for a moment longer, not searching, not weighing, just present. Maybe, she said, but I would not be the same person standing here. Now the answer was simple but complete, and Daniel realized something then, not as a realization that demanded action, but as one that asked for understanding. This was not a moment he could change. This was not a decision he could revisit. This was a reflection of who they had both become, shaped by choices that could not be undone, only understood. And for the first time that evening, he did not try to move past it. He simply let it remain. The space between them held for a moment longer, not stretched, not fragile, just complete, in a way that did not ask for anything more, and yet something remained unspoken, not unfinished, but waiting. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat, his posture no longer guarded, but not entirely at ease either. The kind of stillness that comes when control is no longer the goal. There is something I can do, he said, finally. His voice low, measured, not as a command, not as an offer meant to impress, but as a statement that felt almost unfamiliar, coming from him. Emily did not respond right away. Her eyes stayed on him, calm, steady as before, but there was a subtle change, not resistance, not expectation, just awareness. You cannot change what already happened, she said gently, not dismissing him, not challenging him, just placing the boundary where it belonged. Daniel nodded once. I know that, he replied, and this time there was no hesitation in it, but I can acknowledge it properly. The word properly lingered between them, carrying more weight than any apology would have on its own. Emily studied him for a moment longer, not searching for sincerity, not testing him, just observing the shift that had taken place without announcement. Acknowledgement is not something you give to fix the past, she said. It is something you carry into what comes next. Daniel let out a slow breath, the truth of it settling without resistance. Then let me carry it forward, he said. For the first time that evening, there was something in his voice that did not come from habit or position, but from intention, the kind that does not need to be reinforced. Emily glanced briefly toward the rest of the room, a quiet check of reality. The tables, the movement, the responsibilities that still existed beyond this conversation. Then she looked back at him. What does that look like to you? She asked, not inviting, not rejecting, simply allowing the question to exist. Daniel considered it for a moment longer than he would have before, not because he lacked answers, but because he was choosing not to rely on the ones he already knew. It looks like not repeating the same decision. When I recognize it again, he said, it looks like not measuring everything by scale, when precision matters more. He paused, then added, and it looks like not overlooking people who do not present themselves the way I expect them to. The words were simple, but they did not feel rehearsed. Emily listened quietly the way she had throughout, not interrupting, not redirecting, and when he finished, she gave a small nod, not approval, not validation, just recognition. That would be different, she said, and the way she said it carried something subtle, not doubt, not certainty, just openness. Daniel leaned back slightly, the tension that had once defined his presence in the room now gone, replaced by something steadier, something that did not need to assert itself. "And you," he asked, after a moment, "what comes next for you?" The question was softer now, without assumption, without direction. Emily's expression remained calm, but there was a hint of something deeper beneath it. Not hidden, just not offered freely. "The same as before," she said. "I continue forward with what I have chosen." She paused briefly, then added, "Not everything needs to change to move forward. Sometimes it just needs to be understood." Daniel nodded. Again, the rhythm of acceptance, now natural, not forced. He glanced once more at the coffee, now completely still, no steam, no movement, just a quiet reflection of the light above. And for a brief moment, he saw something in it, not an answer, not a resolution, but a reminder that time had passed, whether he noticed it or not. "Thank you," he said, the words simple, but different from anything he had said earlier. Emily inclined her head, slightly acknowledging, without making more of it than necessary. "You are welcome," she replied. And then, without hesitation, without pause, she stepped back, not abruptly, not dramatically, just returning to the flow of the room as if that was always where she belonged. And Daniel watched her go, not with urgency, not with regret, but with a quiet awareness that something had shifted, not around him, but within him. And for the first time that evening, he did not try to follow. He simply remained where he was, letting the moment settle exactly as it was. The restaurant slowly returned to its natural rhythm, but for Daniel the shift did not reverse. It stayed with him, settled in the quiet space where decisions usually form, but this time no decision came. He sat there a moment longer, his hand resting near the untouched plate, the coffee now completely cooled beside it, reflecting the overhead light, without movement, the kind of stillness that did not ask for attention but held it. Anyway, he looked up once more, his eyes finding her across the room, without effort. Emily moved through the space with the same calm presence as before, not faster, not slower, just consistent, her focus on the work in front of her, not on who might be watching. And that was what remained with him the most, not what she had said, not even what he had realized, but how she had remained unchanged through all of it. He reached for his wallet, then paused. Not because he was unsure of the action, but because for the first time the action itself felt secondary. He placed it back down, slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of the table instead, as if grounding himself in something more immediate. The server returned, quietly placing the check beside his plate. "Whenever you are ready, sir." Daniel nodded once, but did not look at it right away. Instead, his gaze lifted again, following the same quiet line across the room. Emily had just finished clearing a table, adjusting the chairs back into place, with the same deliberate care she had shown earlier, and for a moment she stood, still not noticing him, not needing to the space around her, settled naturally as if it responded to her presence rather than the other way around. Daniel picked up the check, finally, his eyes, scanning it briefly, not for the amount, but for the small detail at the bottom, the printed name of the server. It was not hers. He held it for a second longer, then set it back down, untouched the pen beside it, remained where it was. He did not sign, he did not calculate, he simply left it there and reached into his pocket, placing cash on the table. Not excessive, not performative, just enough to cover what was owed, and then some. But even that felt incomplete, not because it was wrong, but because it did not carry what had actually changed. He stood slowly, the movement unhurried, his chair sliding back, with a soft sound that barely drew attention. No one turned, no One paused. The room continued as it always had, and for the first time, he did not expect it to respond to him. He took a step away from the table, then stopped briefly, his eyes moving once more across the room. Emily was walking toward the kitchen, now her figure partially framed by the warm light of Prosh, the service area. And for a moment it felt like the distance between them was exactly what it needed to be, not a barrier, not a loss, just space defined by choices that had already been made. He did not call her name again. He did not interrupt her work. He did not try to close the moment with anything more than what it already was. Instead, he turned and walked toward the exit, his steps steady, not rushed, not hesitant, just forward. As the door opened, a soft sound, followed by a brief rush of cooler air from outside, and then it closed behind him, just as quietly. Inside the restaurant, nothing changed. Plates continued to move, conversations carried on, and Emily returned a moment later, taking her place in the flow, as if she had never stepped away. The table he left behind remained simple, the coffee untouched, the check unsigned, the cash resting neatly in place, and for anyone else, it would have looked ordinary, just another completed meal, another customer gone. But the absence of the signature lingered in its own way, not loud, not obvious, just present, like something intentionally left unfinished. And somewhere beyond the walls of the restaurant, Daniel paused for a brief second, looking down at his watch, then up at the street ahead, and for the first time for a long time, he did not check the time to control it. He simply noticed it and kept walking. And inside, where the light stayed warm and steady, Emily adjusted another glass on another table, her movements calm, unchanged, her expression quiet. In that quiet, something remained, not spoken, not acknowledged, but understood that some moments do not need to be resolved to matter, and some names are not meant to be forgotten, even when they are no longer spoken aloud.